What are some good combat tips in Pathfinder 2nd Edition? What are the best ones? And do you need to fight me to find out? Please don't, I'm feeble. This is the Dominomicon, authored and hosted by me, Dominic. The Dominomicon is dedicated to all nerdy things, with my current obsession being the TTRPG Pathfinder 2nd Edition. In this video chapter, I'm going to go over what I believe are the best 10 combat tips in Pathfinder 2e from my years of experience as a GM. Of course, your mileage may vary depending on your build choice, etc., but I would say that generally a lot of these tips are going to apply to most players, whether new or experienced. There's not much more else to say, so if you find this video chapter helpful and or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing, hitting that join button, or taking a look at my Patreon. Regardless, thanks for watching. So let's draw some weapons and strike that off-guard war drum to start the music. Right, so I'll be throwing out some images from Foundry VTT with some 4 battles that I will have set up to illustrate some combat strategies. Some of these combat tips might be more build-oriented or maybe ideas as you level up your character, but some of them are just going to be general combat tactics. This will be a top 10 list in no particular order, and please bear in mind the whole white room scenario thing. Basically, in this system, trying to plan out strategies for an unbelievably perfect turn is not going to be half as helpful as just generally planning character builds that are more useful overall. Just think of all the opportunities you're missing because that one perfect turn isn't coming up due to planning everything to be unbelievably unique and specific. White room scenarios don't tend to work all that well in the system, and that has been confirmed by Paizo themselves, and this is partially due to how the enemies in the system tend to have relatively decent AC and saves, which makes these white room scenarios come up a lot less. Right, with that out of the way, let's charge straight in. Movement in PF2E is absolutely one of the best tactics in the whole system, and it's something that is often overlooked by players. And this is not just for characters that have high speed. The reason that I think this particular tactic is one of the most important in this whole system is because actions in PF2E potentially and usually equal damage. Thus, if an enemy has to spend extra actions moving towards you in order to spend actions dealing damage, they are losing said damage. So try to think of movement like that. Movement equals actions, and actions equals potential damage. Very simple, and honestly, it's pretty important in this system. On top of that, I've said it before and I'll say it again, a lot of monsters in this system have 3-hit combos, and sometimes they'll have 2-hit combos as well, where they will attack and then they'll get a multiple attack penalty less grab action, which they tend to have pretty high athletics for, and then they do a third thing, which tends to be pretty killer. If you spend a single action moving away from them, they cannot do that 3-hit combo. It literally just removes it from play practically entirely. Lastly, having good speed can be incredibly powerful because you can potentially spend one of your actions moving away from an enemy, and if your speed is higher than theirs, they may have to spend 2 actions closing that gap, which is huge. On top of that, obviously, there's no attacks of opportunity by default in the system, and it's around 10%-ish of creatures that have reactive strike here, so tactical positioning is very important, and so is running for cover. There's a million use cases for movement in this system, and a lot of players just need to move a lot more. It's something that I've noticed when a player has 1 action left, they'll either just do nothing or they'll try to do a 3rd attack with a ridiculous amount of MAP or whatever, when they could just run behind a wall or take cover or break line of sight, etc. Also, flanking. There's a million reasons to move in this system, and it absolutely is king. Moving onwards. Speaking of actions being potential damage, you should consider stealing their actions even if it costs you more overall. Now, there are obvious scenarios where this is a bad idea, but aside from those situations, and I've said this before and I'll say it again no doubt, when you're in a situation where your party altogether has more actions than the enemies do, then it's absolutely worth considering spending 2 and maybe even 3 actions just removing 1 of theirs, because overall your team will still have more than they will. Thus, mathematically, it's an excellent idea to actually remove their actions, and again, that also means that 3-hit combo is potentially unusable, or maybe a 2-hit combo if you're incredibly clever and or lucky. Actions such as tripping enemies or attempting to disarm them, stuns, slows, and spells like paralyze, and even abilities and feats that reduce the movement speed with difficult terrain, with the PCs moving out of the way of the enemies, are all fantastic ways of reducing their actions. It's simple and it's clever and it's unbelievably useful in this system. Really consider taking their actions. It'll do you a lot of good in those difficult fights. Now let's keep going. I've already established that actions are incredibly valuable, and so why should you waste that 3rd action attacking when you already have a pretty high MAP? There are many a situation where the enemy has pretty high health and or AC, and I've seen players still spend that 3rd action attempting to hit them, and I really question, why are they doing this? They're not actually going to kill them, and they pretty much know for a fact that unless they get a crazy high roll or a nat 20, that they're not going to eliminate them at all, so instead they should be doing tactical things. So if you basically know more or less for a fact fact that you're not going to kill the enemy by attacking one more time, you should really consider doing things that could debuff the enemy instead or inflict some sort of condition, etc. Obviously, this depends on your build. If you're a high damaging build, then maybe using skill actions isn't the best idea, but still, look at actions such as tripping enemies and disarming them, and all the other cool skill actions you could do to make them easier to kill for your allies. These things will serve you a lot better than just attacking again with a ridiculously high multiple attack penalty, or even when you're in a position that you pretty much know for a fact you're not going to be able to hit them, let alone kill them. Consider how much better off your allies will be if that enemy has a lower AC, especially for crits, or even if their attack rolls or saves are going to be lower, rather than trying to hit and do a teeny tiny bit of damage when it's not going to do all that much to them anyway. Plus, there's that whole movement thing I mentioned, and actions like raising a shield or parry, etc. Rolling onwards. Now, this is a tactic I have mentioned time and time again on this channel, and there's very good reasons for it. It absolutely is one of the most powerful things you can ever do in this system. While you can only stack differing conditions and penalties in this system, that's still not an excuse to not abuse the crap out of it. First of all, off guard is just generally one of the best conditions to inflict on your enemies in the whole system. Again, looking at movement being king, moving to flank is just super easy and is almost always going to be a simple and effective tactic to make the enemy weaker to you and at least one of your allies. Then you can do things like stack off guard with frightened or sickened. And remember that you can potentially stack those conditions higher because you can make the enemy frightened too, which in combination with off guard has just reduced their AC by 4, which is a massive increase to the chances you or your allies have to crit. And of course, you can also stack buffs to your allies. Guidance or Courageous Anthem plus aid both work together. That in combination with a frightened 2 and the enemy being off guard is a potential +6 to a +8. And because of the 4 degrees of success, a +8 is utterly mental. Lest we forget persistent damage. In PF2E, you can actually stack differing types of persistent damage. So you can stack poison damage with bleed and fire damage, etc. Just imagine all the different types of persistent damage you could have on an enemy, and when they have to end their turn, they're going to take a massive bump. You could potentially have something like 3 or 4 D6 at the end of each of their turns. Something like that on a particularly powerful encounter, like a strong enemy with lots of HP, is going to whittle them away incredibly quickly. And that DC 15 flat check they have to make for the persistent damage, that's for each case of different persistent damage. So with the example I said above, that means they have to roll 4 times just to get over all of it, and the chance of them actually succeeding on all of those rolls is incredibly tiny, like minuscule, like my brain size. Do not overlook persistent damage, it's awesome. Next up. Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a cooperative tabletop role-playing game. That means you have to work together. You, singularly, will never be the best at everything. And that's both in real life and in this TTRPG, which is pretty sad, I know. You might be the best at 1 or 2 things, but ultimately you're never going to be the god of this system. That's the GM, like me. And the game is balanced around that exact idea. You are meant to work as a team and coordinate with each other. So one of the best pieces of advice I can give is to stop looking at your turns as singular and consider your allies and what they're capable of. Obviously, as you level up and spend more time as a unit, you will learn what their skills and strengths actually are. But you can always just ask each other, especially if your GM allows you to communicate between each other when it's not someone else's turn. You can actually start coordinating your tactics together, and as this game is rather tactical, it's never a bad idea. So always consider your positions when you're struggling with that last action. Just think, if I move here, I'll be flanking with my ally for the next turn. Or consider if I try to demoralize this enemy, then they'll be frightened for my ally's turn, not for mine, etc. Or even consider things like, I'm going to stand in front of my ally so that the enemy will try to target me first, and then I'll give them a whack as well. I know it's not going to kill them, but hopefully it'll distract them enough so they don't kill my low health ally. And of course, remember each other's skills and spells and the like. Think about positioning generally. Actually, speaking of... There are a quadspillion reasons to move around in this system, as I've already mentioned. Not all enemies have reactive strikes, and thus you should really move around when you can. Movement is king, but even more important than getting away from an enemy so they cannot do their 3-action combo is positioning yourself for your allies. Keeping in mind the previous section and your allies' skills and abilities, you should also consider things like spells. If one of your allies often does an area of an effect attack, try to move out of the way so they have the opportunity to do that. Move in, hit, and move back, etc. Always consider your positioning. And then there's things like cover. If an enemy is a ranged attacker and you get the feeling that they're going to strike you the next turn, or again, they have an area of effect spell or just a powerful spell that they've been using, try to just run away and get behind a wall or something. Actually try to give yourself cover so they cannot do anything. Even using spells and the like to manufacture illusory cover is going to save you a lot of damage in the long run. And of course, it goes without saying that it really helps with flanking as well when you use positioning correctly. And then there's other things to consider, like blocking enemies in tight corridors so they cannot get through you and they need to tumble through. They could waste actions just trying to go around or through you. Remember to use the terrain to your advantage as well. Climb on things, jump up things if you have the skills that allow your jump height to be particularly high. The enemy may waste a whole 3 actions just trying to get to you if you're able to jump up something like a 15-foot vertical surface. The terrain is your plaything here, and do not dismiss what you can do with good tactical positioning in this system. Always consider your next move. And next on the list is... Delay and ready are actions that I don't see get used enough in this system. Remember that actions equals potential damage, so if the enemy is far away from you and it's your turn first, unless you have some cool ability or something that you can place down just to make things more difficult for the enemy, or unless you're a ranged character, just delay, just stand there, let them come to you. When you delay your turn, you can basically jump in at any moment, just not during someone's turn. So just start your turn once the enemy has ended their movement if they're a lot closer to you. And of course, you could ready an action if you don't have something like reactive strike, etc., and have them waste their movements and their actions coming to you, and then you give them a wallop. Let them expose themselves and even move into easier flanking positions, so you're saving actions either dealing or helping to deal damage. And I personally recommend healers go first because they can buff and do bits of attacking stuff, and then they can start their healing on their second turn rather than throwing it out there on the first. Let healers have fun too, you know? Right, what's next? This is more of a build idea generally, but you can keep an eye out for this as you level up your character. Abilities and feats that allow you to combine actions are incredibly awesome in this system. It's actually potentially action economy breaking when you can do some of these things, because breaking the action economy here is one of the best ways to destroy this system. Abilities such as the Animist subclass Liturgist at level 9, Dancing Invocation, allows them to step and sustain at the same time. That's really awesome. Sustain is not unbelievably powerful, but hey, you get to do it practically for free if you're going to be moving 5 feet anyway. And then there's abilities such as Defensive Advance for the Guardian and the Champion, which allows you to move, raise a shield, and attack all at the same time. Again, you're just saving an action. That's very powerful. And if you're grabbing the Medic archetype, you should grab Doctor's Visitation, which allows you to move and then do battle medicine. These are just examples of action compression abilities that are incredibly strong because they allow you to do a kind of ludicrous amount of stuff. And honestly, it's one of the reasons I say having an animal companion is really good, because for 1 action, you can command them, and then they get 2 actions. Obviously, special mention should go out to the summoner here because they effectively get 4 actions every turn, although you do kind of have to mix and match whether you or your Eidolon gets them. Summoner sucks. Oh, sorry about that. Moving on. The most powerful skill action in this entire system. I've said it before and I will say it again. Recall knowledge. If you ever have a spare action, or even if you don't, just try to recall knowledge. Understanding your enemy is one of the most dominant strategies you can do in this system. Knowledge is power. For spellcasters, you could be asking what their saves are, because it's kind of big when you lose an entire spell slot because they have a particularly high save. You could ask them for the speed. Once you know how quick they are, you can know if you can move away from them and force them to spend 2 actions to get to you just for one of yours. You could ask for their AC as well, so you know if you need to use conditions to reduce their AC to start crit fishing for you or your allies. Look for the resistances, look for the weaknesses, look for the special abilities, and check if they have one of those 3-hit combo things. Even just checking their traits will teach you a lot about whether or not they're immune to certain conditions and effects. All of these things come from one skill action that everyone can do. And yeah, it's obviously tied to your skills, but overall, recall knowledge is just unbelievably strong. I've recommended it a million times before, and I will recommend it for another million, and maybe even 3 million, but not 4 because that's silly. Last but squirtingly not least, this is something I've seen trip up many parties. They all end up just taking 1 or 2 different damage types, and then they're kind of screwed. They'll have piercing and slashing in particular, and 0 bludgeoning weapons. This is definitely one of the worst things you can do in PF2E. I've seen medium encounters turn to nearly extreme because players not having certain damage types. So if you're a martial, you should be picking up multiple weapons that can do differing damage types, and if you're a spellcaster, you should be picking up spells that can do different damage types. It's absolutely worth losing an action or two just swapping a weapon so you can actually deal damage versus doing next to no damage whatsoever over and over. If they have resistance 5 to slashing and you're doing 7 or 8 damage each hit, that's barely anything versus them having no resistance to your bludgeoning and instead you doing something like 12 or 14 damage or whatever. And for spellcasters, try to vary your spells by targeting different saves. It's also good to have save spells and spell attack rolls, because while not a lot of people like spell attack rolls, they can be off guard to them, which massively increases your chance of hitting them, and ultimately you don't like losing a spell slot and nothing happening. So yeah, absolutely make sure you've got lots of different types of damage on your person at any one time. Again, try to coordinate with your allies to make sure you don't all have the same damage type, because that's going to lead to a very, very bad time. And you know, if you ever do need bludgeoning damage, remember that unarmed attacks do exist. Grabbing a gauntlet is never a bad idea. Right, hopefully you've learned a thing or two from my list. There's still a million other things I could mention, like saving your hero points for when you go down, don't dismiss consumables like healing potions, talismans, concoctions like bottled lightning and the like, and try to focus fire enemies down. One enemy killed is one enemy that cannot deal damage to you, etc. Actually, the 3-action economy kind of makes weaker enemies very powerful in this system because they can get a few attacks on you. One of them could be a natural 20. So yes, actually focus firing down weaker enemies, or even just generally focus firing down single enemies is a great idea. These tips obviously come from a GM's perspective. I see what my different parties are doing in my different campaigns, and when I see them doing what I would call poor tactical choices, I consider things like what they could have done. PF2E is somewhat forgiving, so it's not like you're gonna die just because you made 1 or 2 wrong choices or whatever. But yeah, the tactics I've listed here are things that I see quite regularly, or things I would like to see quite regularly. Obviously, your mileage may vary with some of these combat tips, but I do think generally parties would do a lot better in combat if they would adopt some of these a bit more regularly. Okay, that's going to do it for this video chapter. As ever, thank you for watching, and I hope it was helpful to you, and if it was, please give this video a like, or consider subscribing, joining as a member, or taking a look at my Patreon. Your support literally means the world to me, really. I'd like to say a special thank you to my members and archivists, Max Magnus 20019, Ozzy Smith, Shard, Sirakia, Nikola Milenkovic, and Kyle Travis, and patron and archivist Clash. Thanks again for all your support. But for now, this is Dominic of the Dominimi Nomicom, wishing you a fond farewell, and until next time, goodbye.